Today's Pebble Mill at 1 plays host to the Broadcasting Press Guild Television Awards for 1981. The categories include the Best Drama Series, Best Actor and Best Actress. Among the nominees are Anthony Andrews, Ian Richardson, Helen Mirren and Judi Dench. And to add extra musical sparkle to the proceedings, today's guest singer is a man who's won many awards himself, Frankie Vaughan. That's today's special edition of Pebble Mill at 1. And now at 12:30, News Afternoon with Richard Whitmore and Moira Stewart.
Hello, good afternoon. The headlines this Friday lunchtime. The building societies have made their biggest reduction yet in the mortgage rate. It's down by 1.5%. For the second time this week, appeal court judges have overturned a murder conviction in a case heard by the same Old Bailey judge. And in South Africa, only 5,000 people turn up for what was billed locally as the first test between South Africa and the English 11.
We'll be seeing what the cut in the mortgage rate means for the housing market, buyers and sellers. This morning's opinion poll, putting the Conservatives ahead in the country for the first time, concentrates attention on the forthcoming by-election in Glasgow. Our political editor has a report on that campaign. And we report on the work of a unique treatment centre for drug addicts, just given a last-minute reprieve by the government.
So the building societies have cut mortgage rates this morning, and as was widely forecast, it was 1.5%. The ups and downs of the past few years have been fairly frequent, but today's cut is the biggest the societies have ever announced. The reduction will mean savings of about £1.15 for every £1,000 borrowed. Depositors too, as you might expect, will also receive less. The new rate was 1% below the present figure. Over now to our economics correspondent at the Building Societies Association.
It was here in their council chamber that the building societies took only a matter of minutes this morning to agree unanimously on the 1.5% cut in their mortgage rate. And so for literally millions of borrowers, the saving will make up for the budget, where the Chancellor's tax increases left many of them with less in their pockets. Savers with the societies will receive less, but the cut in their interest rate of only 1% is a very good deal indeed. Basic rate taxpayers will be getting about 12.5% on their investment, a very competitive rate. Indeed, both today's rates from the societies, for savers as well as borrowers, will be very hard for the high street banks to match. But all the same, is this the best possible deal? A few minutes ago, I spoke with the chairman of the Building Societies Association. Interest rates generally in the economy are now about 3% lower than they were last October. So, could the societies have cut even more?
We did not follow rates up to the top, and therefore your comparison is arithmetically correct, but I don't think beyond that. No, we think that we have made, if I dare to say so, a fairly bold move. It was very much our impression that the budgets of borrowers had been really rather badly hit by the 15% mortgage rate, and we were anxious to reduce it as soon as we could by as much as we could, consistent, obviously, with leaving us room to pay the investors the proper rate of interest. And we think that we have achieved that.
Are you worried that the banks will undercut you next week?
Oh, that is a problem for them, not for me. If they can undercut us, good luck to their borrowers. We think that we have offered a very keen rate in the marketplace.
Where are rates going to go from here? Will they carry on down?
That would certainly be the hope. And I think that the Chancellor made it fairly plain in his budget that it was his hope that rates would continue to slide down throughout the rest of the year. And we would certainly share that hope.
Where do you think the mortgage rate might be by the end of the year?
No, one would hope that it would be lower, but where was a different matter. I think the optimistic and the proper way to look at it is that at last we've got a minus sign attaching to the change. So often it's a plus. You normally only talk to me when it's bad news. And here we are with good news, and we've got a minus sign on the mortgage rate, and perhaps there will be another.
Finally, can I ask you what you think this is going to mean for house prices? The market seems to have been very sluggish for the last year or so.
Yes. I don't think it'll mean a lot for house prices, which depend, in our view, very much more upon levels of real incomes, which we understand are still declining, levels of confidence, improving, but by no means at a good level yet. I think the move today, we hope that the move today will have much more of an influence upon the house builders. And we would hope that they will be encouraged by this and by the hopes of a further cut to increase the levels of the number of new house starts, which are showing a modest upturn, and we would like very much to see that increased.
Well, as you heard there, the building societies don't expect house prices to change dramatically after today's announcement. Indeed, the house market has been very sluggish over the past year or so, with falls in places. Each building society has a different figure on that fall, varying from 2 to 6.5%. Well, whatever the percentage, it has been a buyer's market. But what do the estate agents think of all this? Well, with me now is Terry Canoe, the housing correspondent of the professional magazine Estates Gazette. Terry, do you think it will continue to be a buyer's market for the moment, or will prices shoot up?
Well, certainly it's going to continue to be a buyer's market for a while yet. The chances of prices shooting up are very slim indeed. There's an awful lot of slack to be taken up in the market. As you say, it was dead for 2 years. Things just have not been turning over. Now, obviously, this cut in the interest rate is going to help to get things moving again.
Particularly for first-time buyers.
Oh, yes.
They've had a lot of problems, haven't they?
Well, certainly, they've been scared off by the high interest rates. That's been their biggest bugbear. But the rest of the market has had problems too. People have been scared of trading up. So the middle section of the market has really suffered worse than any, I would say.
Because a lot of people during this recession have taken out smaller mortgages to improve their existing property, haven't they? These people surely won't want to move now.
Probably not immediately, but I suspect that it will still be in their thinking. But at the same time, they're probably likely to leave off a decision until prices do rise, which could be quite a while, I would think.
Mm-hmm. You were saying the sort of middle range of houses have not sold. This obviously has built up a big backlog, and that is going to take time to clear, isn't it?
Yes, there's a lot of people who tried to sell their houses over the past 2 years, who found they couldn't get their price and weren't prepared to accept less, so they simply withdrew from the market. Now they're likely to start coming back again, so there's still quite a lot of property to shift before you reach a real imbalance between the supply and the demand. What
about the top end of the market? Has that been affected at all?
That's more variable. It's very much a different sort of market if we're talking about the £150,000 plus price ranges. The sort of people who can afford a house in that range probably aren't too bothered about interest rates because they can afford to pay whatever they have to get their loans. So really it's a market all of its own right at the top.
Yeah. Terry Canoe, thank you very much indeed.
And we've just heard since we came on the air that Barclays Bank have cut their mortgage rates by 1.25% to 13 3/4. A man has appeared in court in Bolton charged with the murder of a young policeman in a factory yard yesterday. 36-year-old Arthur Edge was remanded in custody until next Friday. He's accused of murdering 20-year-old PC John Edgerton, who was stabbed several times after investigating an incident in the Farnworth area of the town. And the funeral service was held this morning for the policeman shot dead during a raid on a factory in Bishop Auckland, County Durham, 8 days ago. Detective Constable James Porter, who was 35, had been in the force for 15 years and joined the CID about 6 months ago. Tony Baker joined the mourners at Langley Moor, near Durham.
40 policemen formed a guard of honour outside St Patrick's Roman Catholic Church in the village as relatives arrived for this morning's service. Detective Constable Porter's widow, Eileen, was comforted by his sister Christine as they entered the church with family mourners who'd been at a private service last night. Today's Mass was more of a public occasion, attended by more than 500 former colleagues and villagers. Police forces from many other parts of Britain were represented. The tiny 19th century church couldn't accommodate them all, and the service was relayed to a nearby church hall. Mourners heard the parish priest pay tribute to Detective Constable Porter and say Britain could be rightfully proud of police officers who courageously strive to make it possible for men to live in peace and harmony.
For the second time this week, appeal court judges have overturned a murder conviction in a case heard by the now retired Old Bailey judge Edward Clark. This time they've substituted an 11-year sentence for manslaughter in place of a life sentence for murder on Colin Simon Ward, a Londoner found guilty of stabbing a man to death. The appeal judges ruled that Judge Edward Clark hadn't dealt properly with the accused's defence of provocation. On Monday, the appeal court quashed the murder conviction of another Londoner, Newton Rose, because they felt the judge had put unfair pressure on the jury.
The government has granted a financial reprieve to the only centre in Britain which treats drug addicts using a mixture of drugs. But it's only for 6 months, and after that it says that the centre, which is known as City Roads and is located in the centre of London, must be funded locally. The centre offers a unique service to addicts, many of them young, homeless and living on the streets. Bill Hamilton has been to see it.
They call this the crisis run. Every day an old London taxi plies its way between hospital casualty units and the country's only multiple drugs centre. The cabbie is a social worker, the passenger one of a growing number of young chaotic drug addicts trapped in a self-destructive lifestyle.
This is the reception room where you will be staying for the first few nights until you've settled a bit.
City Roads is a crisis intervention unit offering immediate medical and social help on a 24-hour basis. Addicts like Ken have been hooked on drugs for half their lives. Most are both homeless and unemployed. For those desperate to escape from the neglect that has accompanied their life on the streets, this unit opens up new opportunities.
The last time I was here for about 3 weeks, and then I went on to a program. I stayed there for about 16 months, I think it was. And I stayed reasonably straight for about 3 years, and that's the longest time I've ever been off. You know? But I didn't quite make it, obviously. Again, I'm here this time, but I hope this time, you know, this is the last time.
Counselling forms an important part of life here. Many find it a traumatic process, raising deep-seated anxieties about incidents which have for so long remained unresolved.
I can sort of make it myself, but I kid myself a lot, you know.
There's considerable argument about just how many drug addicts there are in the country. The Home Office lists 6,000, the Department of Health 20,000, while the chairman of the Standing Conference on Drug Abuse says there are nearly 3 times that figure.
I think wherever one looks around the country, one sees a complete spread all over the country, whereas in the 60s it was mainly London-based, the drug-related problems. It is now a nationwide problem, and the facilities in most parts of the country just don't exist.
Why do you think?
Because there is no statutory requirement for them to be set up, and because the drug field is a particularly unpopular one when it comes to parting with public money.
Despite increased vigilance at Britain's ports and many more drug seizures, the centre's director says the amount still being smuggled in is a source of real concern.
Certainly heroin is not only arriving, it is on the increase. We know that seizures at ports are on the increase. And we also know, more importantly, that the availability is much greater than it has been over the last 4 years, and that the prices remain stable for something like 5 years. And stable prices in times of inflation, in fact, mean reduced costs. We now find people who 2 years ago could not afford heroin are now coming to us with heroin habits.
The government's decision to continue to finance this unit for another 6 months will give City Roads some breathing space. But they warn that if funds dry up, hundreds more young addicts will find themselves with no one to turn to.
That report from Bill Hamilton. Church leaders in Liverpool said this morning that yesterday's demonstration against the Pope's visit to the city won't disrupt moves towards Christian unity. In a joint statement, the Anglican Bishop and Roman Catholic Archbishop of Liverpool deplored yesterday's noisy scenes at Liverpool Parish Church. The statement expressed deep regret at the affront given to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was howled down and had to abandon his sermon. As Dr. Runcie left the church, police had to keep back abusive, placard-waving demonstrators. Malcolm Balin heard the views of both local church leaders this morning.
I was present in Liverpool Parish Church yesterday when this interruption prevented the Archbishop of Canterbury from preaching God's word. I believe that those who were there and saw an ugly face of hatred saw a glimpse of what sectarian division used to mean in the city. And I believe we will have increased greatly the number of people who are determined to prevent us from going back to that.
My impression on Tuesday, when the same thing happened to me in the same place, was that the great majority of people coming out to the church in a lot of distress at what they had seen, were saying very plainly, this has strengthened our commitment to Christian unity. There can be no going back. And to that I would add, there must be no retaliation.
There was a woman there who said to me she was an evangelical. Those are my Christian roots, are in the evangelical wing of the Church of England. And I would want to say that all the evangelical Christians I have ever met would be ashamed of that name being associated with the hatred, the non-reason that was being displayed yesterday. And the Evangelical Alliance, which speaks for the Christian Brethren and independent Baptists, Pentecostals, have issued a statement saying that they welcome the Pope's visit because they support freedom of speech. They mention matters that they want to debate with him. But Christian debate is right and proper, but it should be conducted in a Christian way.
Mrs. Thatcher is today touring the northeast, where unemployment levels are the highest in England. She performed the opening ceremony at a new factory in Gateshead, which makes boilers for nuclear reactors. Afterwards, she paused in her tour to give Nick Owen her reaction to the latest Mori poll, showing the government 4 points ahead of Labour.
One is very pleased. One doesn't take too much from one opinion poll ever, but I think it's very good. We had a good budget, an appropriate budget, not gimmicky, a sound budget, and I think people realise that. And followed by a reduction in tax rate, and of course we're hoping that there'll be a reduction in mortgage rate today, and that'll be very good news all round. But it's because people now are really making the policy work, like this factory. Successful, high productivity, efficient, the latest equipment, right here in the northeast. And it's a great thrill for me to be here.
Here in the northeast, of course, you're in the area of the highest unemployment in England.
I know, that's why here we have the latest technology being made in Britain by the latest process, and this is a story we want to tell to all of those who can give us orders so we get more jobs.
You're bringing
here.
a message of hope, are you?
A message of hope, and I'm trying to lend a hand to get more exports for us here, right in the northeast.
The Hillhead by-election in Glasgow is likely to be the next landmark on the political horizon. Polling takes place there in just under a fortnight. Our political editor, John Cole, has been in the constituency watching the field.
The by-election of the century. That's what Roy Jenkins calls the contest at Hillhead, this eccentric wedge at the heart of Glasgow. It's a race with no obvious favourite, and it comes at a crucial and bumpy time for the Social Democrat Liberal Alliance, which aspires to transform British politics beyond recognition. It'll certainly settle the destiny of Roy Jenkins. When he first declared himself a candidate at Hillhead, his prospects looked good. This was the Conservatives' only seat in Glasgow. Their majority in 1979 had fallen to just over 2,000. The government was having a rough time economically, and the Alliance was riding high in the public opinion polls. But now the Alliance is trailing in the national polls, and Jenkins knows he has a stern fight in his hand.
For unemployment, that's what means.
Well, I think that's a crucial central issue of the election.
Shirley Williams and the other leaders have come north to help, but the SDP campaign is still hobbling to achieve the momentum that produced her sensational victory in Crosby. Gerald Malone, his 31-year-old solicitor, is running hard to defend Hillhead for the Conservatives against his famous opponent. Much will depend on whether Scottish voters like the budget as much as Tories at Westminster. Malone's a Catholic in a city where religion remains a political issue for some, and he can't be sure that the Orange vote isn't snapping at his heels. Malone's fighting a national battle, for Hillhead could determine the kind of alliance Mrs Thatcher will face. If Jenkins wins, he and David Steele will produce a centrist challenge.
Well, it's dry this afternoon. It certainly wasn't dry this morning. I thought I was going to turn into the archetypal Tory wet.
The Labour man David Wiseman is a community worker. He's trying to hang the label carpetbagger on Jenkins. Labour has never won Hillhead, but without Jenkins and with Scotland blighted by severe unemployment, Wiseman might have expected a straight fight victory. Labour support's holding up well in the old shipbuilding and engineering districts along the Clyde. The big question is whether voters who want to administer a rebuke to the government will vote tactically, and whether they'll decide that SDP or Labour has the better chance.
Things are looking pretty black, and hopefully, but...
Well, the most important one we see is jobs, you know. We've got to create jobs and real jobs.
make your votes for the Hillhead by-election.
George Leslie's fighting a vigorous campaign.
By a returning Scottish National Party candidate.
Since the referendum in 1979, the devolution issue's been dormant in Scotland, but now the nationalists are beginning to get their tails up again, and the other parties are having to talk about how Scotland should be governed. Leslie will have an influence on the result, depending on where he draws most of his votes from, and some even think that in a tight election he might pull off a sensational victory. There are 4 other candidates: W.G. Boakes, Public Safety, Democratic Monarchist White Resident; Dr. Nicolette Carlaw, Ecology Party; Pastor Jack Glass, who's against the papal visit; and Roy Harold Jenkins, who also calls his party Social Democratic. Everyone's striving to get out the vote in an exceptionally tough contest. The 2 decisive issues are likely to be the economy, and particularly unemployment, and the personality of the more famous Roy Jenkins from London.
So the whole future of British politics may be shaped here on the banks of the Clyde on the 25th of March. It's an untypical constituency in many ways, and not one that any of the parties would have chosen for such a vital contest. But there's one salutary fact that's staring all the candidates in the face. Unemployment, budgets and economic problems generally look starker here than they do at Westminster. And whichever candidate can convince most voters that his party knows what to do about those problems will win Hillhead.
Abroad now, and the first match of the series between the South African 11 and the England cricketers got underway this morning in Johannesburg. But when play began, only 5,000 people had taken their seat at the Wanderers Stadium, which holds 35,000.
Here at home, the argument over the position of the editor of The Times, Harold Evans, continued today with conflicting statements about his future. The managing director of Times newspapers, Gerald Long, said differences between Mr. Evans and the Times owner, Rupert Murdoch, weren't over editorial independence. But a close colleague of Mr. Evans on the Times said that they were just that. Brian Hanrahan asked why Mr. Murdoch had tried to remove Mr. Evans.
Here, Mr. Murdoch is a man who likes his newspapers to reflect his political views. He's a man of very right-wing political views. Regardless of whether we're talking about right, left or centre, Harold Evans, and he has a reputation for it, is defending the principle that a newspaper can be independent per se and independent of the views of its proprietor. In the case of The Times, this was enshrined in law when Mr. Murdoch took it over. It's a very important principle, not just for The Times and for the future of The Times, whether or not Mr. Evans remains editor, but for the rest of British press.
But Mr. Murdoch owns The Times. Isn't he entitled to have it reflect the view he wants?
No, and he gave an undertaking to the government that he would give, he has a right of hire and fire of an editor, subject to the National Director's approval. Beyond that, the editor has total freedom of editorial judgment, decision and manoeuvre. And that is one of the undertakings Mr. Murdoch gave to the government.
What is Mr. Evans' position at the moment? You say he's editing the paper. Does he have any intention of resigning?
Not at all, no. He's obviously an embattled man. It's not much fun, this. There is confusion and disarray among the staff, as you would expect. There are those in the building who are not assisting Mr. Evans in this struggle, but I would say a majority are. It's a very important issue, and he's there editing the paper, and I hope he remains there.
Well, now back to money matters. In the foreign exchange, the pound has been under pressure from a strong dollar, and at noon it stood at $1.80.1. And that's a fall of almost a cent. On the stock exchange, trading's been quiet, and the FT index has drifted down 2.9 to 565 exactly. Now, you remember we told you a little earlier in the news that Barclays Bank have announced that they're going to cut their mortgage rate by 1.25%. Well, to give us more details of what this means, we're now going back to our economics correspondent, Mark Rogerson.
Well, here at the Building Societies Association, news has just reached us of the Barclays move. And the societies, I may say, are surprised, both at the speed of Barclays' response and the new rate. It's very important to realise that the banks and the building societies calculate the payments on mortgages in a slightly different way. And so a 13.75% mortgage from Barclays is the same payments as a 13.5% mortgage from a building society. In fact, when I spoke to some bankers privately this morning, they admitted a 13.75% rate would really hurt them. So they're almost losing money in the battle for mortgages. It seems from here on, the battle for mortgages can only hot up, and it'll be the service given by the banks and the societies that will probably really determine who gets the loans. And now back to the News Afternoon studio.
Mark Rogerson bringing the time to almost 5 to 1.
That means it's time for the weekend weather forecast with Michael Fish.
Good afternoon to you. Well, lower interest on mortgages, but I'm sure far greater interest on the weather. Certainly this chart today has been a labour of love, a great mass of isobar streaming right across the Atlantic, and that obviously, as you're well aware, spells very windy weather. It also spells pretty unsettled weather, and we're going to keep that way, I think, throughout the weekend. This little joker here, now just to the northeast of Scotland, is the one that produced all the strong winds overnight. In fact, it's still producing strong winds, and the cold front associated with it brought a belt of quite heavy rain across the country. But that's out of the way now, and we find ourselves in this quite stiff run of northwesterly winds, so colder weather with a fair number of showers for most of us. But already lurking behind me, yet another area of low pressure with its frontal systems, and that'll be moving quite quickly across the Atlantic during the course of tomorrow, bringing some further, more general rain to most parts of the country, and then in its turn, that too followed by a return of the showery weather. So pretty changeable, pretty unsettled, as I said. But let's look at the satellite picture now, and this was about 9:30 this morning, and at that particular time we still had the cold front just across the southeastern corner of the country. But of course, being a weatherman, I ensured that that cleared through my house just as I came out the front door this morning, so I got to work in the dry, and that's now moved across into the North Sea, and you see following along behind it quite a packet of showers, and these are going to be pretty heavy, and they'll last right into the night in many places. So as far as today is concerned, it is just a straightforward showery picture. There'll be some sunny intervals, but there'll be a fair number of showers just about everywhere, so I don't think any place staying dry this afternoon, and many of those showers turning out to be quite heavy and wintry, with sort of hail and thunder mixed in with them. Snow as well. In fact, there may even be some snow showers right down in the south, but most of the snow will be in the more northern parts, and over the hills in the north, some quite heavy falls of snow, with that snow drifting in these still very strong winds, and quite a cold afternoon. The coldness, of course, brought home rather more by the fact that it will be so windy. During the course of the evening and night, the showers in the more central and eastern parts will tend to die away, and that means with the wind easing off a little and the skies clearing that there could be a touch of frost and some icy patches in the roads, but in the more northern and western areas, a fair number of showers throughout the night.
Thank you, Michael. Well, in the city, as we've seen in the news today, it's been a week of preoccupation with what's been going on here at home, what with the budget and interest rates. But there have been many developments abroad, some of considerable significance. Ed Mitchell of our financial staff considers what's been happening in the Far East.
Think of Japan, and you probably have ideas, amongst other things, of a fast-growing economy, dedicated, efficient workers and robots, and floods of cheap cars and hi-fis. Well, they might have efficient workers, but the Japanese economy has been looking rather shaky recently. This morning, nervous investors sent the Tokyo stock market down heavily. The market index suffered its biggest one-day loss this year, down more than 150 points at 7,100. That leaves it about 10% lower than a few months ago. What's bothering investors is that the Japanese economy is slowing down. Figures out this morning show that Japan's gross national product fell for the first time in 6 years in the final quarter of last year. Their exports haven't been doing so well as their Western customers continue to struggle in the recession, while domestic demand has become sluggish. The Japanese are also getting very nervous about the possibility of a trade war with the West, while recent figures show a decline in the profitability of Japanese companies. Adding to the pressure on the Tokyo stock market has been heavy selling by Arab oil exporters now that their oil revenues are dropping sharply. And just to cap it all, the Japanese yen has been under pressure on the foreign exchanges. It's the weakest of the world's main currencies at the moment.
And so to the main points of the news again with subtitles. The building societies have cut their mortgage rates this morning, as was widely predicted, by 1.5%. It's the biggest cut the societies have ever announced. It'll mean savings of about £1.15 for every £1,000 borrowed. Depositors will now receive less interest. The new rate will be 1% below the present figure. A man has appeared in court in Bolton charged with the murder of a young policeman in a factory yard in the town yesterday. 36-year-old Arthur Edge was remanded in custody until next Friday. He's accused of murdering 20-year-old PC John Edgerton. The appeal court has overturned another murder conviction in a case heard by the retired Old Bailey judge Edward Clark. It's the second time in a week On Monday, they quashed a murder conviction on Newton Rose because they felt the judge had put unfair pressure on the jury. Now, Colin Simon Ward has had his murder sentence turned into an 11 years for manslaughter. The judge ruled that Judge Edward Clark hadn't dealt properly with the accused defence of provocation.
And that's it from us at the end of another week with the news that the banks have now joined in the battle for building for mortgages. That's all from us for another week.